All righty. Can you hear me, Dan?
Yep, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Perfect. Just want to make sure we're ready to rock and roll here. So today we are going to be reviewing the agreement of sale, but in a different way. We're going to review the agreement of sale from the listing agent's eyes. So this should prepare you guys that, you're representing a seller, you guys get an offer, how are you going to look at the agreement of sale and, advise your seller compared to advising them as a buyer's agent, because it's a little bit of a different view. So that's what we're going to touch on today. All right, perfect. So remind you guys, my goal is to wrap things up around 3 o'clock sharp. So again, you guys know the drill. I'll probably be pretty specific here on staying on topic, but please ask questions. And, again, we'll get it answered. If not today in class, we'll have a one-on-one and get it done. So going to bring up some stuff here. Let's see. Share my screen here, bring up an agreement. Okay. All right, let's throw this. It's fine. All right. So for the agreement of sale, so first thing I'll mention to you is that when you get an offer, and you're representing the seller, well, let me back up. You'll first get a phone call, usually, or an email or text from a buyer's agent, and they usually like, hey, I think we're going to write up an offer. Number one thing to remember is don't tell your seller that. Like, don't run and say, hey, guess what? Just got a call from the buyer's agent that, showed it yesterday and they're bringing us an offer. Because it'll just turn into an emotional roller coaster for your sellers, because, you'll be, after you're in this business a little while, you'll realize that you'll hear that over and over again, and then they never really do bring an offer. So, keep that inside. You can tell your seller, like, if they say, hey, what about that couple that looked at it last night? You can say, hey, I heard that I followed up with them. From what I understand, they're very interested. If I end up getting something, I'll let you know. But don't, tell your client, that you have an offer until you have an offer. And, and if it hits your email, then you can let them know. All right. So at that point, usually when I get an offer and I'm representing a seller, I'll notify them that I have it. And then I'll set up a time for us to review it together. The other way of doing it, I mean, you can send it to them ahead of time also, and they could start looking over it and then, set up a meeting to review it. But either way, you want to set up a time to review it with them, right away, as soon as you can. If it's a multiple offer situation, then what I would do is I would recommend, you go into your seller and say, hey, we got multiple offers on the property. Let me lay out the options of how to deal with this, and you could pick how you want to, operate from here. And so, because you always got to remember, your seller's the one that's in charge. Like, sometimes agents make the mistake of making decisions for them, and they'll speak on their behalf, but you got to be careful and make sure that you're always speaking exactly what the seller wants in these transactions. And so because some sellers, they may not want to have this big multiple offer game. They might want to say, hey, like, this first offer, this is great, it's a strong offer, let's just go with them. I don't even want to deal with all this. So, just, you got to make sure you're just doing what they want. And so what I would do is, if it is a multiple offer situation, just lay out the options. And, I won't get into extreme depth about this now, but, the options would basically be like, hey, do you want to set a time and let everyone know out there, like, hey, we're going to be reviewing all offers, tomorrow at noon. So submit your best and final by tomorrow at noon. So I could blast that out to everyone that's looked at the house, and I could, even put that on the remarks of our listing so everyone sees it, and I can put that out through showing time so everyone's aware of that deadline tomorrow at noon. Or do you want to just go ahead and just negotiate with the ones that we have now. And if we're able to get the negotiation done, just wrap it up right away, you know? So it's up to them, you know, you leave that completely up to them. So, but multiple offers we can get, that's a whole nother class. So moving on. So we're assuming that you got the offer, you know, and you're looking through it first yourself, which I recommend, and you should jot notes down yourself of points that you're going to make to the seller, you know, good or bad. And then if there's anything that is like an outstanding item in an agreement of sale that's like, this doesn't quite make sense, this is not adding up here with this offer, try to get back in touch with the buyer agent and figure that out before your time with the seller, you know, because if you're meeting with the seller at, you know, 8 o'clock at night to review this offer, and then the seller is like, hey, well, like, why are they doing this? You're like, I don't really know. I guess I'll have to get back to them. Well, now you're drawing out a lot more time. So if you see that up front when you're reviewing it for the first time, get back in touch with the buyer agent right then and there and say, hey, can you explain to me like why they want, you know, a 9-month settlement date? So that way I can tell my seller that information, because they're going to ask you, you know, can you explain to me, like, do they really need all the seller assist that they're asking for? You know, so, you know, make sure you do your follow-up questions up front is what I'm getting to. All right, so then at this point, reviewing it here, let me see here. The first page, I mean, it's nothing that really needs to be touched on. Okay, so and my idea is we're gonna go through this every major term and kind of just, you know, think of what we would want to look for as far as a good item for my seller. So price, that's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, we want the best prices possible, you know. As most money as we can get is what we want. It's a pretty simple one. The deposit is the same thing. We want as much as a deposit as possible. So they can split the deposit into two. You know, as a listing agent, you want as much upfront as possible if you can. But you know, if they're insisting on like, hey, we're only going to do $2,000 up front, $8,000 later, I mean, that's fine. But again, I'm just saying that if one client is willing to give, or one buyer is willing to give 10,000 up front, and the other one wants to split it, you know, and give only 2,000 up front and 8,000 later, the one that's willing to give more up front in just the deposit term, that one's better, because you're getting more money up front. All right.
Hey, Louis.
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
I work in 2 states. I work in Delaware, and Delaware's rule of thumb is different than Pennsylvania's for deposit. So what's kind of the general rule of thumb as to how much they should be putting down in Pennsylvania?
You know, I would say, and it varies. I mean, I usually recommend to my buyers anywhere between 2 to 3% of the price is usually. You know, I made an offer on a property in Paoli like last year, and the listing agent was like, oh, well, this is way too low. You know, we need 5%. That's standard, you know? So you're going to hear different percentages. But most of the time when I have a buyer do 2 to 3% of the price, I usually don't get too much kickback that like, that's not enough. So I think that's a decent middle of the ground.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Yeah, no problem. Let me see here. I had some notes here. All right, so that's all for the deposit that I had down there. So again, the more the better, the more upfront the better as well. That's for a deposit. Next, seller assist. So with seller assist, you always want to calculate for the seller what the net is going to be, factoring in the seller assist they're asking for. So if they're asking for, you know, 5,000 in seller assist, you want to do the price minus the seller assist equals the net to the seller. So when you're considering an offer with seller assist, always have the seller pay attention to that net. Like, don't have them focus on any of the other numbers, always on the net. So it's the same thing if they put a percentage in there. All you would do is, you know, take that percentage times the price. That'll give you the seller assist figure. And then once you have that seller assist figure, whatever that is, that number, you just minus that from the price. That's the net. All right. And so make sure that's something you should pay attention to, because it's, you know, it could be a big mistake if they have list price up here and you kind of oversee that. and your seller's like, oh, this is great, you got me list price, and then they didn't recognize that $10,000 seller assist here. Well, that's way off the list price. So make sure you pay attention to that.
Hey, Lewis, this is Joyce.
Hey, Joyce.
What, I don't, that whole seller assist, what is the point of that? Why wouldn't the price, you just offer them a lesser price? What is the advantage or disadvantage of that?
Great question. So the advantage and disadvantage. So if you lower the price on the buyer side, you got to think of this on the buyer's perspective. Lowering the price will only lower the buyer's mortgage payment. They're still going to, if a lender says, Joyce, you need $15,000 to buy this house out of your pocket, and your payment is going to be $1,500 a month, to make that easy. Well, if you lower the price, your payment is going to drop a little bit, but you're still pretty much going to need $15,000 to buy the house and closing costs. So what they do is, the other option is they ask for what's called seller assist. So seller assist will actually lower the amount you need to purchase the house, but the payment will stay the same. So if you can get $5,000 in seller assist, instead of needing $15K to buy the house, now you only need $10K to buy the house. But your payment would pretty much stay the same. So it's a way for the buyer to deduct their closing cost amount that they need. So it's good for a buyer that maybe doesn't have a whole lot of cash, and that closing cost amount plus down payment is just too much for them to bear. So they're like, hey, I need to ask for seller assist to bring that number down. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's fine. So basically it's affecting the mortgage or not affecting the mortgage.
Correct.
Hey,
Now,
Lewis, I have
yes,
I'm
please.
sorry. Yeah, I got
Go
another
ahead,
question.
Yeah.
So hey, from our past conversations, looking at it from a seller side now rather than a buyer, from a situation I was in, what would you, as the seller agent, want to see from the mortgage, the lender, around the seller assist? Do you want them to come back and say, based off the terms you have, you're only eligible for 2% seller assist of the listing price? Do you want them to come back and confirm that with you before you submit the offer?
So you're a listing agent, you get an offer where they're asking for seller assist.
Yep.
You're asking, as the listing agent, do you want to confirm that they need the seller assist with the lender? Is that what you're asking?
I want them to confirm that their lender is willing to give
Allow
a
that.
3% or a 6% a seller assist. Yeah.
I see what you're saying. So whatever seller assist they have on here, you just want to confirm that the mortgage that they're getting allows that seller assist.
Exactly. The percentage wise. Yep.
Absolutely. So later on in our teaching here, there's a section where, I feel like it's a great idea to reach out to the lender and ask a few questions. So I would add that to the questions you're going to ask the lender. Add that to the list. Yeah, it's definitely a great idea to ask.
Yep.
Good question. Renee, did you have a question? Unless you didn't mean to have the
Sorry,
hand.
I had raised my hand before and you didn't see it, so I just
Okay.
blurted my question out.
All right, no problem.
Okay.
So let's see here. Other than seller, okay, so we got to we know how to calculate the seller assist. You always have the seller, pay attention to the net. Now, if a buyer's asking for a lot of seller assist, that's something you want to ask questions around. You want to maybe look at the BFI and see, does this person have enough money? You don't want to ignore red flags as a listing agent. So, someone's asking for the maximum amount of seller assist, that should be a little bit of a red flag to you, like, okay, is money tight for them? Do they have enough money to buy this house? Let me look at their BFI, to see if they're writing enough assets down to purchase this house. So just make sure you don't ignore the fact if someone needs a lot of seller assist. However, if they do need a lot of seller assist, and you can tell, obviously, they do need it because they're not very liquid, they don't have much money. That's okay. Obviously, if you have other offers, they don't need seller assist and they're strong offers, then yeah, those are higher on the totem pole. But I guess my point is that don't allow a seller to completely discount a buyer just because they're asking for seller assist, because some sellers don't really know what seller assist is, and they may look at that as a huge negative. They're like, oh, they need seller assist, they shouldn't be buying a house. Like, no, like a lot, especially depending on the price range you're in. Like if you're in a first time home buyer price range, 200, 215, you need to educate your seller that, look, a lot of buyers are probably going to ask for seller assist because this is the first time home buyer price range. And so a lot of first time home buyers don't have $20,000 just sitting there that they can use to purchase a house. So this is something that we're going to probably run into a lot. So let's consider this offer. Yes, Renee?
You mentioned a maximum amount of seller assist. What is that? I didn't know there was a maximum. Is that depending on the lender, what the lender's requirements are?
Yeah, so it depends on what, usually it depends on what the loan is, so whatever the different loan is. So like you have conventional loan, you got FHA, VA, they all have different amounts of seller assist that they allow. So what I would do is I would just double check with the lender just to make sure that seller assist is within those limits that is allowed. But
Okay.
usually it's anywhere from 3 to 6% is usually what's normal.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. All right, perfect. All right, so I think we got a hold of seller's assist. Let me make sure that I didn't have anything else in my notes here. Oh, that's another point. So sometimes what they'll do is when someone's asking for seller assist, they will try to raise the price to offset the seller assist they're asking for. So to make math easy, let's just say it's listed at 100,000 and your client wants $5,000 in seller's assist. Well, if they offer 100,000 with the 5,000 in seller assist, their offer really is 95,000. It's not 100, because that's what the net is to the seller, 95. So sometimes what they'll do is they'll say, oh, well, we'll just offer 105,000, and then we'll ask for that seller assist of 5, and now the seller is still getting that list price that they want. So sometimes that works, and sometimes that's okay. But I'll give brownie points to someone who can answer. What's the thing that put your hand down there? What's the one thing that you got to be careful about if you raise that up to 105,000? Yes, Renee.
You have to make sure that the house will appraise for that amount.
Absolutely. Ding, ding, ding. You can share that with Dan, because I think Dan was trying to answer, but I wouldn't let him. But no, good job, guys. Yes, you have to make sure. So now, do you know for sure? You're not an appraiser. You're not going to know for sure, of course, but you should know the comps, fairly well, and you'll know, like, hey, we listed this already at the ceiling, for the market, the fair market value. So going any higher is probably not going to be the way to go. But if you guys listed it a little bit lower, then you can give it a shot and go for it. But either way, you got to take that into consideration. You have to educate your seller and tell them, like, hey, we can accept this 105, and you're still getting your 100, but just know there may be an appraisal problem, and we'll have to deal with that at that time. So that's why sometimes, well, I have a buyer right now that is just having such a tough time buying a house because they need a lot of seller assist, and they always want to make these offers on properties that just hit the market. And they're like, hey, but we're willing to go like 10,000 above the price. I'm like, I understand that, guys. I'm like, but if it's a multiple offer scenario and someone's offering 100 and you're offering 105 with a 5K seller assist, they're going to want to take the person that's offering 100. I know the prices are the same, but now they don't have that appraisal risk, so you're going to lose that battle every time. So yeah, so just remember that. Let me see here. All right, so next, settlement date. So with settlement date, you always just go with whatever your seller is, whatever works for them best, pretty much. I always say, though, if they're open, they're like, hey, we're fine with whatever settlement date, the sooner the better, because the longer you hold something out there, the more chances of something going wrong and the deal falling apart, the more chances of the buyer getting fired or laid off, and now they can't get a mortgage no more. You know what I mean? So you want to eliminate the risk of the deal not going through as best as possible. And so the best way to do that is have the shortest possible settlement. Now, again, your main concern, though, is doing whatever's comfortable for your seller. So if they need a long settlement date, then you have to go with a long settlement date. But I'm just speaking that if everyone's wide open and no one cares, the shorter the better for the seller. All right. Time of essence. So time of essence from the seller side, you know, whatever that time of essence date is there, you want to educate your seller that, look, this is how much time the buyer is giving us to negotiate and reach an agreement with them. All right. A lot of people get it wrong because they think like, oh, this is when we have to answer them. Like, no, if you read, it says written acceptance of all parties will be on or before, not, hey, we'll get a reply on or before. So so you have to tell your seller, like, you know, they're expecting us to negotiate and reach an agreement and sign this agreement before this date is up. So if that date is unrealistic, then I would communicate right away with the buyer's agent, you know? So I would go to them and say, hey, you know, you gave me like 4 hours here. Like, I just want you to know that's like, it's not realistic for me and the seller. The seller's working a 12-hour shift right now in the hospital, and there's just no way I can do it. So let them know up front. All right. But besides that, you know, if it is a decent time frame, you know, use that to have some urgency with your seller. You know, hey, we have a date here. You know, we got to try to get this done, or else this offer is void, you know, by that time. So,
Hey, Lois, I have a question.
yes.
I'm showing a house, and the listing agent came back and said that it's pending, but if you want to come see the house anyway, let me know. Like, is one to assume that that means the seller is contemplating multiple offers?
So if the property is under contract and they're willing to still show the house, that just really means that they're willing to probably entertain a backup offer, or they want to market to buyers still, that just in case this current buyer backs out, then they can reach out to people that's already seen the house and see if they're willing to, you know, jump on it at that point. So that's the only reason for it at that point. And just since you brought that up, when a property is listed pending in the MLS, they're not supposed to show the property anymore. If a property is listed active under contingency, then they're supposed to allow showings on it still. So that's the differences between the two. But the whole reasoning behind it, Joyce, is again, just that, hey, we just went under contract. We still have contingencies here that the deal could fall apart. So we still want to continue to market it and allow showings. That way we can either generate a backup offer, or we can at least generate interest. So that way, if this deal falls apart, we have people to reach out to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Perfect. Great question. All right, let's move on. All right, let's talk a little bit about here, this number 7. So a lot of times the buyer's agent will write in here what the buyer wants included in the sale, what they want excluded in the sale. And then if there's any leased items, you want to make sure that they write those leased items in here. So that way it's disclosed that it's leased. So what I would do is just make sure that you read, you know, this paragraph, 7B, this entire paragraph, and whatever's written in here to the seller, and say, hey, I know this is crazy, but let's leave me 2 minutes to read this to you. This is everything that's going to be included with the sale, including whatever they wrote in here. Are you okay with that? And if they're not okay with that, that's something you need to negotiate and go back. Now, this shouldn't be the first time that you read this paragraph to the seller. I always tell people, when you first list the property, you should go through what is typically included in the sale, so that way they know up front what's included. But yes, go through it again on the agreement, and just make sure that you're on the same page. And the same thing with leased items. You know, you should already know what's leased on the property when you're actually taking the listing. That should have been a discussion then. But you know, you might know that the propane tank's leased, but maybe the buyer's agent didn't. So you might want to school the buyer agent and say, hey, write in here, you know, the propane tank's leased, please. You know, I want to make sure that's disclosed. And so anyways, yeah, so just make sure you review the inclusions, exclusions, and the leased items with your seller. And then if something's not something that they don't want to agree to, then negotiate that with your buyer's agent. Dan, did you have a question?
No, I'm good.
Okay, perfect. Mortgage. So the mortgage contingency. Obviously, if the mortgage contingency is waived, that's the best scenario for your seller. So, you know, a buyer's offer that has a waived mortgage contingency is going to be more appealing than a buyer's offer with an elected mortgage contingency. Because a waived mortgage contingency, they're saying that, hey, we either aren't getting a mortgage at all, and you don't have to worry about that, or we are getting a mortgage, but if something goes wrong and we can't get the mortgage, we're still going to go through with the sale. It's not contingent on us getting the mortgage. So a waived contingency for mortgage is obviously a great scenario for the seller. But 90% of the time, you're going to deal with probably an elected mortgage contingency. Most people are going to have financing. So the things that you want to just take a look at when you're looking at this is that, you know, right here, the type of mortgage, number one. So you got FHA, USDA, VA, conventional. In a seller's eyes, the different types of mortgage, and you're not thinking about price, I'm just talking about just the type of mortgage. You know, conventional is the best for a seller. And then from there, pretty much FHA, VA, and USDA kind of all fall in the same bracket. The reason for that is that those government-backed loans, which are the FHA, VA, and USDA, excuse me, they are more picky about the condition of the listing. So when an appraiser goes out there, not only does the appraiser is trying to justify the price, but the appraiser also is red flagging anything that is like a condition item in their eyes, like a problem. Conventional, they're not as picky as about the condition. So that's why, like, you know, if you have two offers at the same exact price, one's conventional and one's FHA, the listing agent's probably going to lean towards the conventional one. So that way there's not repairs that are red flagged and needed for the mortgage process. So that's that with that. So you just want to pay attention to the type of mortgage and, you know, educate your seller on that. The LTV here, the lower the LTV, the better, because the lower the LTV, the more down payment the buyer is putting down. So when you're looking, if you're looking at a buyer that's putting 20% down and you're looking at a buyer that's putting 5% down, again, if they're the same exact price, you probably want to go with the 20% buyer because they're a lot more powerful financially. So than the 5% one. So the more money down, the better usually in the seller's eyes. Interest rate. So whatever this interest rate section here, you know, they put the interest rate in the first box and then they put a spread, an interest rate spread. So they, you know, they hike up the interest rate a little bit. The buyer wants to keep that spread as short as possible. The seller wants to keep it long. I mean, you know, as big as possible. So, you know, if you have a buyer that puts 4% in here and then their maximum interest rate is 4.1, you as a listing agent want to speak up and say, hey, we want to see that be a little bit more of a spread. We want to see, you know, 4.5, 4.75, you know, even 5%, you know, if you could. So you want to see a longer one because the reason is because the spread indicates what the interest rate they're quoted at and then the ceiling, that if they're beyond that ceiling, then the buyer can elect to get out of the deal. So if you have a really, really short gap, then it might be easy for the buyer to get out if the market swings a little bit. So that's why you want a bigger gap. That way, if there is a little bit of a hump with the interest rates and the buyer's not locked in yet or whatever, they still have to stay intact with the deal. Next thing here is the mortgage approval date. So you as a seller's agent, you want you want the mortgage approval letter as quick as possible. So, you know, I would try to elect to get the mortgage approval from the buyer's agent. I would say, you know, within at least 30 days or less. You know, if it's beyond 30 days, like if they're saying, hey, we'll get you the mortgage approval letter 45 days, 60, like that's just a long time. You know, so, and whenever the settlement date is, you want it as furthest away from the settlement date as possible. Like if they're saying, like if they're doing a 30-day settlement and they're saying, hey, we'll get you the mortgage approval on day 28, like that's a no-no for you as a seller's agent. Like you want it on day like 18 if it's a 30-day settlement, something like that. So you want it as quick as possible. All right. So make sure that you call that out if the buyer's agent is putting it really close to settlement. Okay. Paragraph. Well, let's just do line 143 here. It's the one with this E next to it. Right here. It says within 7 days from the executed date of the agreement, buyer will make a completed mortgage application. 7 days is fine, but if you see that the buyer's agent put in here like 20 days or something like that, call it out. Try to say, hey, why would the buyer need 20 days to make a mortgage application? So you want it to be as quick as possible on here, but 7 days is fine. Some people try to do it to match this date with the number of days for inspections. They want them to kind of line up, and that's okay if they do, but you just don't want it to be a crazy number. Anything else I'll point out to you here? Okay, so as a listing agent, you want to make sure that obviously the least amount of elected inspections, the better for your seller. So you just want to, if you have you want to negotiate, most people are going to want to do inspections, don't get me wrong, but if you have one person doing a whole bunch of inspections and one buyer is not, obviously the buyer that's not is going to carry more weight with their offer, because then it's less risk for your seller that the deal's potentially going to fall apart. So here, let me read this here, the sewer inspection. So if a buyer elects a sewer inspection, it says here that buyer may obtain an inspection of the individual on-lot sewage disposal system, which may include a hydraulic expense, will locate, provide access, sorry, I skipped the line, which will include a hydraulic load test from a qualified professional inspector, if and as required by the inspection company. Seller at seller's expense will locate, provide access to, empty the individual on-lot sewage disposal system, and provide all water needed unless otherwise agreed. Seller will restore the property to its previous condition at seller's expense prior to settlement. All right. So if someone elects to do this septic test and you didn't read this to your client, they might be a little pissed off, excuse my wording, but when the septic company shows up, they go to hook up to their house and they need to suck out 500 gallons of water to use for the test. Some sellers, I've seen it done, it's like, you're going to dry out my well, like, what are you doing, yada yada yada. Like, don't get me wrong, the seller has a great point, but it says here that you're going to provide the water for the test. So what you need to do is you need to bring this up in negotiations with the buyer's agent and say, hey, we're fine with you doing inspections, but the seller is not comfortable with you hooking up and using their water. You need to bring your own water, which they can. They pay the septic companies usually can bring a tank of water with them. Usually it's around 500 gallons, and they can do it. It costs the buyer more money, but that's on them. But you want to bring that up. The other thing is having the tank pumped. Like, you don't want to, they're going to get to the point where the buyer's agent's going to say, hey, you need to have this tank pumped before for the inspector to come back out. Well, what do you mean I have to pay for the tank pumped? Well, it says right here in the agreement, you have to pump it. So, and then, obviously it says we'll locate and provide access to. Some people, plant grass and dirt over top the cap of their septic systems. So that seller is going to have to dig that up and provide access to that. So just make sure that you guys are just reading the contract. It's like Dave Ash always says, like, it's all in the contract, guys. Like, it's just many people just don't take time to read it. So just make sure you guys just know that that's there. Okay. Inspection contingency days. So the default is 10 days for a buyer to get their inspections done. 10 days is decent. It's a decent time frame. You know, if they're asking for 17, 18, 19, 20 days to get their inspections done, you need to ask questions. You know, why? Why do you guys need that much time? It doesn't take that much time to get it done. Because the thing is, and deals fall apart a lot during inspections. So the longer you keep that contingency open, the more chances you're giving the buyer to terminate on the deal. You want it to happen as quick as possible. So that way, if the buyer doesn't want it, you can immediately get back out there on the market. If they do want it, great. So try to keep that short, around that 10 days as possible. If they're doing like stucco, septic, well, you know, all the other ones, then they might ask for 12, 14 days or something like that. That's somewhat reasonable. But once it's getting 17, 18, 19, 20 days, like there's really no reason to be that long, okay? Title. So this is kind of like the mortgage date where it says 7 days, the buyer needs to make mortgage application. Well, this say within 7 days that the buyer needs to order title. So again, if it's kept at the default of 7 days or less or around that date, that's fine. But if they put in 20 days or something, again, so it raises a question for you. You should just ask the buyer's agent, like, why did you put 20 days before the buyer order title? You know, there's no reason to wait on that. I would say on this HOA part here, as a seller's agent, just make sure that if it is an HOA or condo association, that your seller is responsible for getting the association docs over to the buyer. So it says in here that the seller within 15 days will order the association docs. Now, usually we have a conveyancer, you know, that works for First Land Transfer. Her name is Lois. She'll usually handle ordering the HOA docs for your listing deals. So when you put when you send the paperwork to her on the seller checklist that we have, Lois will take it from there and order the docs, and then when they come in, she'll give them to you to get to the buyer. So we kind of don't have to worry about it too much, but just you should still know that your seller needs to, you know, order the docs within 15 days and then get them over to the buyer as soon as possible. Okay, so down here, this paragraph C here, line 696, the default is 180 days. It pretty much says like if the buyer and seller agree that there's like a dispute over the entitlement of the deposit money. So like, let's say the deal got a little ugly and it fell apart and they're debating over who should keep the deposit money. And then it says that if that dispute is unresolved or it wasn't taken to, you know, mediation or anything like that, or, you know, or if the broker didn't receive an official letter from the seller saying, do not release that deposit money, if nothing happened and it's just kind of sitting in there, then within 180 days, the seller can have that deposit money sit there for up to 180 days. So that's why as a buyer's agent, we like to change this date to like 30 or something like that, because you don't want a buyer's money to be held up that long. As a seller's agent, you'd like it to be a little longer, you know, or whatever. So I just want to kind of just point that out, that the more days on this section, the better for the seller. But again, I wouldn't focus on it too much, because again, hopefully you're not really going through deposit money disputes too often in your real estate career. So this box here, 719, paragraph 26G, as a listing agent, you want this box unchecked, because virtually it pretty much says that the seller is not limited to going after just the deposit money. They can go after other assets as damages, you know, if the buyer defaults on the contract. So most buyer agents are smart enough to check this box on their offer, and that's fine. You let it go. But if they don't check this box, then you're fiduciary to the sellers. You don't want to run over to them and say, hey, guess what? You forgot to check that. You might want to check it. Like, no, you leave it unchecked. You know, you're representing the seller. So you can call the agent and after the deal's over and say, hey, just so you know on your offers, you should probably check that box next time. Let's see here. Next, all right, so special clauses here. So there's a couple of sale and settlement of other property contingencies. That's when a buyer is saying, hey, I'll buy your house, but I got to sell another house first. So make sure you're paying attention if those are attached to the agreement. They'll check the box here if it is. And if it is, in the seller's eyes, that's not a good, thing with the offer. That's not a favorable term in the seller's eyes. That's just another contingency that they have to deal with. So if they do have another property to sell, it's better that if it's just a settlement of other property. That means like the buyer has another property to sell, but they already sold it. It's already under contract. They're just waiting to go to settlement. So that's a better situation than someone that didn't even sell their house yet. Like if they're still marketing it and trying to find a buyer. If you do have someone that does need to like sell it and settle it, the questions you're going to want to ask as a listing agent is, number one, where is the house? They're on the addendum, they're supposed to list the address of where the buyer's house is that they're selling. So you want to check out, where is it? Is it in Westchester Borough and is it priced well? Is it so that way it's going to sell quickly? Or is it in a horrible, market area and it's overpriced, so it's going to sit? So make sure even though that's not your listing, you still got to think like a listing agent for that and see, like, is this in an area and the position price wise? Because they're supposed to disclose to you what price they're going to list it at too. So you just want to make sure that it's in it has an opportunity to actually sell pretty quickly. All right. And two, like you want to make sure too, like that they're ready to list it, because if a buyer says, hey, we got to sell our house and settle it, you go, well, when are you planning on putting it on the market? Oh, we're not going to be ready for another 2 weeks. Like that's not that great. If they're saying, hey, we're going to put it on the market in 2 days, that's a little bit better. So they're supposed to disclose that too, just so you know how many days until it will be listed. But these are things that you want to make sure you're looking at. There's also an appraisal contingency that could be attached. It's normal if there is one attached, but if there isn't an appraisal contingency, the better for your seller, of course. That's really it. That's really it as far as here. Additional terms, I would just say, just make sure you're looking at. Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Just real quick to go back to the appraisal contingency. That's if they go on and they do an appraisal and they say, hey, you actually do need a new roof. They can back out of the whole agreement.
So the appraisal usually, so the contingency is really addressing the price more than the condition. So it's like the appraisal contingency is pretty much like saying like it must appraise for this
the appraisal
price
of the property. Got it.
Correct. Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. So that's just, it's an added protection for the buyer, that if it doesn't appraise, like they just have a lot more protection to be able to get out of the deal.
Got it.
All right.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Good question. You're welcome. Additional terms here. Make sure you guys look through the additional terms. I've seen so many times that agents like skim through, and I guess by the time they get to page 13, they're getting a little lazy, and just like, oh, this guy, and they don't realize that the buyer put in here that the seller is going to buy a home warranty for the buyer, or the seller is going to make sure that the John Deere tractors and going to be included. Like you just want to make sure that they're not I don't want to say sneaking, because they're not sneaking it. They're putting it right in front of your face, but you just want to make sure that you're reviewing it so that way you're not missing anything before your seller signs it. Okay. All right. And that's really it for that. So what questions do you guys have? Before you ask a question, there is a PAR form. I'll bring it up real quick. Come on. Let me get these out of here. So here's actually I could actually use this for discussion. Actually, this is called the multiple offer summary worksheet. If you get multiple offers, or even if you get one offer, like this is a pretty cool document that you can use that kind of like, instead of 13 pages long, it kind of can, it's a condensed form to kind of look at all the terms in one page, or most of the terms on one page. Especially if you're getting a multiple offer, it kind of puts them side by side, so you can kind of, when you're talking to the seller, you can kind of look at how the terms compare to one another. So I would suggest using this. I've heard your broker. Well, I've heard some of your guys' broker. I know some of you guys are with John Patrick, but I'm sure he recommends this as well. But they even say, like, look, if you get a multiple offers, please use the multiple offer summary worksheet, because you don't know how many times, like, when it's like 8 offers coming in, that the brokers get complaints that, some of the offers of the agents, like, they never got an answer back, or they never got a confirmation that, their offer was even considered or whatever. But, you can keep a lot more organized to make sure everything is being looked at and everyone's offer is being considered or whatever with this type of a sheet. This keeps you more organized. But this is kind of how it looks. So, like, this is a real life scenario happened like a month or so ago. So it's like, you can see 345, 340, 339. So I can compare prices, but I can also look and see, oh, well, this 339 also needed a 3% seller assist. So their net is only 335. So now when I look at the net purchase price, they're way out of the game now because they're $10,000 less than anyone else. You know what I mean? So this is it helps you kind of look at things. Escalation clause, it talks about if there's an escalation clause attached, which I can answer a question about that if you do have a question about escalation.
Question. What is that, Louis?
Yeah, so the escalation clause, Dan, do you want to explain it? No, I won't put you on the spot. But escalation clause is an addendum. And the reason, Renee, just so you know, I said Dan's because he asked this like yesterday or 2 days ago. So the escalation clause is an addendum that pretty much says that this is our offer. This is our original offer. So let's, again, $100,000. We're offering $100,000, but we're attaching an escalation clause addendum to it that says if there's a competing offer that is offering more than our $100,000, then we will go up in price in an increment of $1,200 over that next competing offer. So if we offered 100,000, but there's a competitor that offered 101, well, your escalation clause will go into effect and say, we'll go 1,200 over the next competing offer. So now we'll go to 102,200. We'll go, and then it says, it puts a cap on it. We'll beat out any offer by 1,200 up to a maximum of 110,000. Like if we hit 110,000 and another offer's at 111, we're not adding on that increment anymore. Like this is our cap. So that it's just an addendum that just kind of helps with multiple offer situations when you're working with a buyer to make you a little bit more competitive, because you're like, well, I don't know what these other offers are offering. I don't want to go.
How do you keep track of that on this sheet, like the escalation? Because they wouldn't all be the same thing, would they? Because they would all have a different max or whatever max they chose.
Absolutely. So what you do is you'll just look at their escalation clause, and you would just, go at whatever increment they chose and whatever their max is, then you just figure out what that price is, and then you just list it here. So, if, it's kind of like a confusing scenario, but yeah, that's kind of how you would go about it, is that you would just survey all of them, and you would look at, okay, this one has an escalation clause and they're willing to go up to this price maximum, but this one has an escalation clause and they're willing to go up a little bit higher maximum, in $1,000 increments. So
is
whatever
this form for our sellers, or is it just for keeping our head straight? Like, will we use this to present this to our seller?
I would. Okay. I think I would do both. I would say it's for both.
And where do we find this form?
It's in the PAR Forms library,
okay.
wherever you're getting your docs. Yep.
Okay.
Louis, I got a question. So you think in today's market that most buyers seem to be offering an escalation clause?
I would say that it's probably pretty common right now. Yes.
And that escalation clause is a separate par form?
Correct.
Okay.
Good question. So then this document goes into, you know, cash at signing. So that means a deposit, cash or check within how many days you'll get the deposit, pretty much. If there's another deposit, so you see this one, I put $20,000 after inspections. The other buyer number one, is just doing 5,000 no matter what. Settlement date, you can, you know, see who's settling when. Do they have to sell another property? Yes, no. Then you ask what mortgages. You know, this one was a cash buyer and this one was a conventional buyer. So, you know, obviously the cash is more than weight, has more weight than the conventional one. So yes, and then it even has space for the inspections you can write down, and then it has comments. You know, you can put different, you know, notes on here too, that you just want to remember. All right. So it's a good document to keep you organized. What questions do you guys have? Anything?
I have a quick question, Lois. I've been out of town and unable to come to your classes, which has been very disappointing. But Anne-Marie mentioned to me that they were being filmed or they're taped or recorded somewhere. Where can I find the past, like Mondays and Fridays?
So here's the thing. They kind of were and they kind of weren't, to be honest with you, Diane. So the intention is, okay, good news and bad news. The bad news is that I think so far, I think there might have been like one or two classes that, you know, weren't taped, but then there was one or two that was, but we have had conflicting schedules with the Zoom accounts. And so like the classes had to end in the middle of it. And then we had to like pick it up the next day. So far, like me personally, I'm not really happy with what is recorded because I think it's so choppy and it ends abruptly and things like that. So the good news is that, you know, these are ongoing classes. So you know, I'm teaching the same stuff every single month on the same weeks. And so my plan is that, you know, we won't have these interruptions and I won't have the recordings ending out of nowhere and it's looking all messy in the future. So I will, in the future, will be recording those and I will be posting those to either like a YouTube account or a Facebook account.
Okay.
or the coaching website. So
then this is just ongoing. It doesn't end after these 4 weeks.
No, I don't think I'm getting fired quite yet.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome, Diane. Good question. Let me see here. What else? You guys have any other questions about anything? As a listing agent, you get an offer. So just so you guys know, logistics wise, since we have a couple extra minutes, logistics wise, like you get an offer, you present the offer to your seller, you know, you go through everything, you go through the terms, you go back to the buyer's agent, you negotiate terms. Once you guys get to an agreement, usually the buyer's agent revises the contract for the terms that you guys negotiated, and then we'll go ahead and send you the revised contract, and then your seller signs. So usually the seller is the last signature on the agreement, just so you guys know. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I'm missing. You guys can jump in while I'm thinking. I don't think so. No, I don't think so. So let's talk about next week. So next week is inspections week. So on Monday, we'll go over buyer inspections. And then on Friday, we'll go over seller inspections. And what I mean by seller inspections is like, you know, how do you deal with getting inspection requests from the seller's perspective? And then on Monday, how do you actually do the buyer request for inspection? So it'll be important to learn new things because almost every deal has inspections, and almost every deal agents are going to request you to fix this, fix that. We want money for this, money for that. So you're going to want to know and have a good foundation of how to deal with that. So definitely tune in next week for that. And then the last week is I almost forget. I think it's like closings, I believe. So learning as a buyer, like, you know, the walkthrough, the final walkthrough, and closing, and how a closing is done. And then on Friday, I believe it's like talks about like post-closing systems, like, you know, keeping in touch with like past clients and things like that after the sale is over. Things you can do that way. I think I'm almost not 100% sure. I forget what I'm even teaching. Sorry, but all right. Any last minute questions before I'll wrap up here? If not, going once, going twice. All right. Well, you guys have a fantastic weekend. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Lois.
Thanks,
See you
Lois.
next week.
All right. All right.
Thank
See
you
you
very
next
much.
week. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.